Alrighty, just so we stay on track here, Brian has me doing a couple things right now. I'm moderating, but I'm going to get to moderate myself for a little while, and then we're going to have a couple of the speakers after me. So my name is Thomas Janke. I was formerly the prescribed fire coordinator for our Texas Quail Forever and the Oaks and Prairies joint venture. And so ultimately what that means is I got to learn about a lot of laws and regs, which y'all might have seen in Dr. Treadwell's talk, but as well as, what kind of programs and opportunities may be out there across our state to help incentivize folks to burn, or even resources, not necessarily funding, not necessarily laws and regs, but who's even willing and able, from a landowner standpoint, from a organization standpoint, to assist somebody that has interest in burning and help them get educated, help them get empowered, help them get over that hump of whatever it may be to say, hey, I want to start burning more, or figure it out. And so that's what this presentation is going to be about. Is what are some of the things that are going on in Texas, and can that be learned from and spread out elsewhere? So a little bit about our state. Big state. We're not going to go over all those finite details, but we're talking about 171 million acres. Of that, it's estimated about 141 million acres are rangelands. And so we start talking about, you've heard in Dr. Fullendorf's talk and others, our vegetation has evolved over time to be fire dependent to some level. Typically, as we move from an east to west gradient, that decreases on how much time that fire gradient is. So there's typically less fire return interval historically on the drier landscape versus along the Gulf Coast. But regardless, our vegetation has evolved with fire. And when we take that out of the equation, that system changes. Also to note, even as big as Texas is, this map is produced by now NRI, or the Natural Resource Institute out of A&M. It's kind of a heat map showing where the greatest growth is in Texas for people. And it's alarming to me, at least, because it's estimated that approximately 1,000 people are coming to our state every day. Not visiting, moving to Texas. And we're also losing about a section, or about 600 plus acres, to development each and every day. And that's just the reality of things at this point in time. So we know that we have a need for tools such as fire and others to keep our vegetative state in successional point for the management of certain species. But we also know we have increasing population, decreasing landscape, and so you got this fun, frustrating dynamic of how do we get this accomplished. And Dr. Morgan and Mr. Mike tested for that earlier. And there's just a simple map again showing that gradient, estimated gradient of what is that fire return interval. So how much is Texas actually burning? Well, the Texas Forest Service regularly collects data on how much prescribed fire occurs. And in 2019, they collected data on a total of about 325,000 acres of treated land. Cool, that's a decent start, but as I mentioned earlier, we have more land than that in Texas. We actually have what I found about 8.5 million acres of public land, and I forgot to mention this earlier, of our state, if y'all don't know this already. It's about 95% privately owned and the rest public lands. Of those public lands, only about 2% of that was treated in 2019. More alarmingly, of our 140 plus million acres of private lands, less than 0.1% was treated with prescribed fire in that particular year. So even though are getting somewhere between approximately 300,000 and 400,000 acres of land being treated with prescribed fire on an annual basis, we're still just a drop in the bucket. And this also suggests to me and many others that the biggest room for growth in Texas is how can we get more fire on all our lands, but definitely our private lands. So what are some of the dictating factors of when and how much we may be allowed to burn? So it's just important to note that there are laws and regulations in place. Burning is overseen or mandated by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. And then there are state level laws and there's county level laws or ordinances. And so prior to just a week ago, we have 254 counties in the state. At one point I was looking at a map and it was suggested that over 220 of those counties were in a burn ban. So 90% of Texas was in a burn ban recently. As of yesterday, that had dropped to below 200. So we were fortunate to get some rains and that's changing. But I bring up burn bans because of those 254 counties, sometimes that's a heck no, absolutely, unless you have certain allowances that is set forth by TCEQ, or you're a certified insured prescribed burn manager. Private landowners may not be able to legally burn under certain counties. Other counties, they have allowances or exceptions. So it's really important for individuals to know their county ordinances and get to know their commissioners and judge and work through that. It's also the Texas Department of Agriculture oversees the rulings of the certified insured prescribed burn managers and works with those entities on figuring out what mandates or what accreditations do they need to have to hold that title and to hold those privileges. So a lot of moving facets just with that. Research. I saw a couple of posters represented here from Texas, but there's a lot of entities doing research on prescribed fire in some capacity or another. We got Dr. Morgan back there sitting right now representing AgriLife and the A&M system, but we also had A&M Kingsville represented, but there's quite a few folks in some capacity or another collecting data sets to try to add to this puzzle. And so that's good. The more information we can have, especially the more quality information we can have, the better idea that we have an understanding of, what are beneficial fires and why and when and how and all that good stuff. But that still, and it can help a landowner in some ways. I think some of the bigger things to help move that needle forward in fire, the research does a good job in maybe helping some legislative actions. But, getting to what can help a landowner. Not to say research isn't important, but who's going to help them navigate through those legal requirements, especially if there's a burn ban in place and they may be required, or they're required to have a burn plan. Who's going to help a landowner understand how to have a proper burn plan? And prescribed burn associations are important. We do have a handful of active ones in the state. I don't know how they compare to Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. It seems like we're probably on the lesser end of that with our burn associations, but that is an avenue landowners can go to. We also have quite a few different organizations that at one time or another had prescribed fire allowances within their job descriptions. And at least from my opinion, other people might argue this, but I think that's been waning over time for various reasons. And there's quite a few folks that are still trained, willing, and possibly even allowed or able to help write burn plans, but it kind of stops there. There's not many folks who are able to go out and actually assist or be physically a part of the burn with the landowner if they ask for that additional technical guidance. And even just this year alone, one of our state organization, let me backtrack, multiple years ago, we were getting help, or landowners were getting a lot of help from NRCS, and that has currently changed, and it's been pretty stymied. Hopefully that'll change back at some point, but even our state organization, which was kind of the bigger player for landowners, they had an incident happen in February, and it got political, and we're waiting to see what's going to happen when they come out of that. But right now, they've been out of the game on helping landowners on counties with burn bans for the last 8 months, and that's, again, it's just one of those things landowners have to work with. All the conditions may be right. They may have their burn breaks in place, but they may not have that ability to get that support that they were potentially expecting or relying upon. Our Quail Forever team, which I work with, and the joint ventures, we're able to help right now, but we're not the answer to it all. There's a handful of us that help, and I know there's a handful of people and other organizations that help, but right now, prescribed burn associations are a good avenue for folks to go to that isn't dependent upon an organization, or hiring out folks that are, again, certified insured prescribed burn managers. So there are avenues, but there's not a lot of tangible avenues that are readily available. But what is probably more so available is some financial assistance to encourage folks to burn. A lot of organizations see and are beginning to understand the benefits of burning, especially when it comes to being a maintenance mode tool. Some of our landscapes may be to the point where they're not capable of carrying a safe fire. And so they excuse me, the clapping caught me off guard. They see the benefit of it, so they're saying, hey, we got funds for this, but that's all we can provide you. But again, those funds are kind of a crutch. They can be helpful, but they have their limitations. Probably the most successful one I've seen so far, and it's a small scale, is the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, and that was first modeled by the Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture, and then it's been grown to the Gulf Coast Joint Venture, Rio Grande Joint Venture, and they have their variances of it. But it's able to use money practices such as EQIP, or 7 of the EQIP practices. But the biggest thing they do differently than a lot of other funds, they prioritize fire. Basically, if somebody's willing to burn their property, they're going to rank higher in the application process. And if we can get to the point of somebody using fire more often, it's going to be more of a maintenance tool as opposed to reclamation and having to do more woody treatment, herbicide, brush control, etc. Equipment support, again, it's pretty limited right now on what landowners can reach out to, but as of right now, if a county's not in a burn ban, Texas Parks and Wildlife can help them, Quail Forever can help them at any time, but prescribed burn associations are some of the best avenues, and even some of the local soil and water conservation districts have equipment that folks can use. Education and training. Morgan could probably speak better to this than me. She's involved with a lot of this, but I think at one point there was more of it. The idea for a lot of landowners is to get educated and empowered, so they're not relying upon our organizations for constant support. But it's something now we're having to train our organizations, be it Quail Forever, be it Texas Parks and Wildlife, be it NRCS, be it AgriLife, whomever. We're having to get those people trained, and we're learning to get through whatever hurdles are necessary there in order so those individuals can be trained so they can work on training landowners. So it's an evolving process, and we're working through that. But my takeaway points, ultimately it goes down to what are the goals of the landowner, and no matter those goals, habitat management and conservation is a process. It's not a one and done thing. Fire can be a very good tool, but it's not the only tool, and it's not a one and done event. It takes planning, it takes time, it takes money, and to help landowners with that process, to help all of our states with that process, it's good to work with as many entities as you can find and finding those niches that can help you achieve those goals. And I have this slide on there. Landowners' goals equal landowners' tickets. So you'll see different pictures popping up. Some people might have bobwhite quail, or they might have mottled ducks along the shore, or prairie chickens, or certain grassland birds, or deer, or cattle, or wildland fuels. Depending on what your scenario may be, different entities, whether it's kind of statewide coverage federal money such as EQIP, localized money that have priority counties such as that Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, or even certain watersheds may have opportunities available to landowners depending on what their goals are and if their goals match up with those funding source objectives. So that's why I kind of say depending on landowner goals, they may or may not have different funding avenues available to them. So with that, I believe we've got a couple minutes for questions if y'all have any. Thank you, Mitchell.
So is Texas a simple negligent state?
Yes, Texas is a simple negligent state. And there was, and Morgan, help me out here if I say this incorrectly, but there was some legislation passed, I believe it was last September, maybe 2 Septembers ago, that more clearly defined burn boss, and that was actually, I think, a really good thing. And so that way, if people volunteered with that landowner, or excuse me, with that burn boss to be on a burn, it took away that liability from them unless they were found negligent on a burn, basically intentionally lighting outside the burn or doing something stupid. Until they got clarified in legislation, it wasn't that.
You said earlier that Texas, like, would you say that Texas has like abnormally more issues with like regulations and stuff like that? Why like compared to some other southern states, like?
In my opinion, yes. And the reason for that is numerous regulatory agencies wanting to manage certain pieces of that fire. And then also, we've seen a real disconnect in our fire practitioners right now. So our certified and insured prescribed burn managers are going one way, and our PBAs, just general landowners, are going another way. They're not really on the same page collectively. So right now, our certified and insured guys, they're actually operating under a smoke management negligence standard equivalent to gross.
Mm-hmm.
So
Whereas
those guys are those in mostly state?
no,
Mm-hmm.
they pay $500 for their certification every 2 years. They have to show 6 continuing education credits, and there's several different categories. There's a private category, there's a commercial category, there's a not-for-profit category, and then there's a government category. You can burn under those 4 categories. In the state of Texas, be afforded limited liability in terms of negligence, and then elevated in road in terms of smoke. That's not similar to Orlando or so.
Yep.
I got a quick question. You said like was it the Grassland project that does a good job, and you're ranked higher as you prioritize work.
Yeah, and I looked at my clock earlier, and so I sped up. That particular program is designed to be a model. It doesn't have near the funding, such as EQIP, but one of the things that we've noticed that landowners really like about a program such as the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, it has such a shorter turnaround time on project acceptance. So like with EQIP, I believe there's 2, maybe 3 general sign-up periods. Yeah, depending on what state. I think Texas has 2, sometimes 3.
Most times one.
Okay, yeah, depending on money allocation. And then this one, you can do it any time of year as long as there's money. And then we could set up a review call that week within our team that does reviews, do a project, and some of them get paid within less than 2 weeks after completion.
Okay. How do you so they're prioritized more if they burn? Are they held to that?
Yes,
Is it more flexible? Like for CRP, for instance, you burn and they contract management, which has to be done by year 6, right? So what happens a lot of times is
I'll tell you what, I'm gonna minus out of this and get our next speaker going, but Mitchell, can you answer that one?